Questo è un bambino che lavora in una miniera d'oro in Burkina Faso. Il Burkina Faso è una delle nazioni più povere del mondo. Per il Burkina Faso, che ha l'oro, la Francia stampa moneta coloniale. In cambio pretende che finiscano nelle casse del tesoro francese il 50% di tutto quello che il Burkina Faso esporta. L'oro che questo bambino si infila in un cunicolo per tirare fuori finisce per lo più nelle casse dello Stato francese. Allora la soluzione non è prendere gli africani e spostarli in Europa, la soluzione è liberare l'Africa da certi europei che la sfruttano e consentire a queste persone di vivere di quello che hanno.
Africans and bring them to Europe. The solution is to free Africa from certain Europeans who exploit it. The left who pretend to...
Hello everyone, welcome to the Progressive Mind Show. My name is Senna, aka Alinko, and we are going to be talking about issues going on in West Africa concerning the coups, and we want to go straight to our guest this evening. So we have today on our set our usual guest who is all the way in the UK, Dr. Israel Davidson Nonyerem. He is a professor at the University of Newcastle, all the way in the United Kingdom. My guests are here, and also we have Fred Nwanko, who is also the CEO of Allen Magazine or Allen TV. Fred, correct me if I'm wrong. Gentlemen, you're welcome to the show this evening.
Thank you, Alekio. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I must also say that Dr. Nonyerem has a YouTube channel, and he does commentary on political and economic issues going on in Africa in general. You can check out his YouTube. I'll let him mention his YouTube channel. He is a former presidential candidate of Nigeria, and of course, a politician at that. And so, gentlemen, I want you all to give us a little background of yourself. I will start with Fred.
Well, mine is very simple. I'm Fred Nwanko. I'm the publisher of Allen Magazine and the host of Bold Talk on Allen TV. On YouTube, you can find us at African Viewpoints Unleashed. That's the name on YouTube.
My name is Israel. I've featured on this wonderful program a couple of times. I'm an assistant professor at Newcastle Business School, Northumbria University, and not Newcastle University.
Oh,
there are two
okay.
universities.
Okay.
I'm with Northumbria University, Newcastle Business School. Probably that's where the confusion really is.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm an academic, but also a politician. I think tonight gives us an opportunity to discuss the ongoings in Africa. Thank you.
Nobody cares about us. Brothers and sisters, if you want to know how weak we are, look at how we are treated. The world met in New York, the General Assembly. When African heads of states and government are speaking, the hall is empty. Nobody bothers, because they are saying nothing. And even if they are saying something, it is something that can be ignored. Compare when an African head of state and government is speaking and when the Prime Minister of Little Israel is speaking. They will listen because we are weak and disunited. So we have a weak continent because the spirit of Pan-Africanism disappeared.
But 2 million Jews die. Hitler is the most horrible man. Leopold kills 20 million Africans, and he's still not the most worst man that ever lived. Can you process that? Hitler kills 2 million white people. He's the most evil man that ever lived. Leopold kills 20 million Africans. He still does not appear on the list of the most wicked people that ever lived on the earth. There must be something wrong with this narrative.
give us an overview of the situation in West Africa regarding coup. We know it started with Guinea, then Burkina Faso. I don't know if it started with Guinea, but of course we know Guinea has had coup recently, Mali, Burkina, and now Niger. There are 4 countries, right? If I'm mistaken.
And Sudan in the last 2 years.
Okay, please give us an overview of what has been going on in that part of Africa, and then we can look at the bigger picture.
My generation is asking many questions without getting any answers. We do not understand how Africa, with such wealth and such generous fertile land, with water and sunshine in abundance, is nowadays the poorest continent. Africa is a starving continent, and our leaders are happily traveling around the world begging. The real problem is to see leaders of African countries who do not provide any support to the people fighting imperialism, and who sing the same song as the imperialists. We, the heads of African states, must stop acting as puppets ready to dance whenever the imperialists pull the strings. We must make sure that for the next forum, we must not set foot here without having ensured food self-sufficiency for our nations, those that are not at war.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, when we look at the situation in West Africa today, a lot of times we look at it in a vacuum. People tend to look at the immediate without looking at the historical perspective of how did we get here. When it's all said and done, it's about the policies of France in the French-controlled African countries over the last 50 plus years. So these are not things that happened overnight. Many of us don't recall, for instance, in Burkina Faso in 1987, a president who took over in a military coup was assassinated. That was Sankara. And if you look at these young people in Burkina Faso today who took over power in a military coup, these are the students of history. These are students who grew up reading about what happened to Sankara, what led to what happened to Sankara, what Sankara was fighting about, and why Sankara was killed. But more importantly, what has happened since Sankara was assassinated. Nothing has changed in Burkina Faso. Their lives are still exactly what Sankara fought for. And so when a coup happens, 3 of us on this panel this evening, none of us likes military rules. None of us like coups. Every one of us subscribe to the democratic way of governance. But ironically, France, the United States, the European Union, and everybody involved should be asking themselves, why are these people who are more advocates of democracy now celebrating coup plotters? That's the key question that needs to be asked. And the reason we are celebrating the coup is not that we don't want to maintain democratic governance, but it comes a time when you have to do whatever it takes to force a going back to the table, not just with France and their colonies in Africa, but also with Britain and also with America, who never had any colonies in Africa, but their policies are based on what's in it for us. It's time to realign the economic negotiations in Africa. It's time to realign these things in a way that Africans are good people. We don't like taking advantage of people like the Europe and America and France like to. All we are saying is, let's have a fair deal. We have the raw materials. You want the raw materials. We are not going to eat raw materials. We are willing to sell you raw material or trade with you for the raw material, but it has to benefit our people. Too often you hear European Africa policy makers talking about Africa and saying, what can we do for Africa? Africa doesn't want you to do anything for them. Africa wants you to negotiate with them on an equal playing field. That's all we're asking. And that's not too much to ask. I'll conclude on this note. I don't want to be too long-winded about it. The Niger situation is the most current, and it's the one that affects Nigeria the most. Niger is Nigeria's next door neighbor. There are Fulanis and Hausas in northern Nigeria that are polygamous who have wives in Nigeria and wives in Niger. With the situation...
Before you go take us there, which is very, very important, I would like Dr. Israel to come in and give us, you give us the history of the coup in Burkina Faso. Dr. Israel, I don't know if you're familiar with what led to that of Mali and now Guinea, Mali, Guinea, and of course we can look at Niger as well, if you may, Dr. Israel.
I am embarrassed as an African to admit that most of my African solutions come from abroad. I am embarrassed to admit that I gave a white man the audacity to disrespect me as a black person. I am embarrassed to admit that most of my problems and my solutions are funded by white men. I am embarrassed to admit to the fact that I, as an African, give a white man the audacity to disrespect me. Because how does a mere employee of IMF or World Bank have the power to advise a president? Because they fund us. That's why. Forget about the Minister of Finance. A person who is driven by commission and interest advising you. I am embarrassed as an African when I see my presidents of Africa, spending so much money to just go beg overseas. Most of the projects which are funded by these organizations are questionable. In my country, Botswana, there's a project called Mete a Tsie in Tswapo. It's functional only when USAID or any other organization puts money in it. As long as they don't inject money in it, it's not working. Creating a dependence, creating that dependence between Mete a Tsie and USAID or whatever organization that is willing to give the money. As long as African solutions come from abroad, we will always depend on them. As long as we wait for them to bring us a solution, we will always pay them. We will always pay interest to these big loans. We give them the audacity to disrespect us.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think, let me, before I answer that, I think, let me just share with you a little bit of research I did on military coups.
Okay.
Military coup is not confined to West Africa. I think you've experienced it in different parts of the world. And researchers, analysts, journalists, based on their experience and research, point to mismanagement, incompetence, corruption, economic crisis, state weakness as drivers of military coups. But there was one research done by Carlos Garcia Rivero of Political Science Department in Valencia University. And what is unique about that research is that it focuses on sub-Saharan Africa. I think they wanted to find out, realizing the number of coups taking place in that region. The purpose of that study was to find out how people of the sub-Saharan region feel about military coups. Now, they discovered that people welcome military coups, not necessarily because they're interested in an army taking over, but because they are fed up with their governments for many reasons, including security threats, humanitarian disasters, and lack of prospects. But what is also interesting about that study is that they also discovered that people of the region are not also happy with the process of elections as the preferred option for changing governments. And I think it is easy to, agree with them, because the reason they are not, choosing the option of elections as the best way of changing government is that it's so difficult to change civilian administrations, particularly in West Africa, through the ballot box. Because a lot of these individuals, whom we call the political leaders, have found their way of manipulating the ballot box, corrupting the balloting process, and so forth and so on. For example, in Nigeria, since 1999, a lot of the decision as to who governs that country, were taken by the court rather than the ballot box. Apart from that of the previous years led by President Jonathan. And one other thing about this particular research is about the opposition parties. That is, they discovered that also that people in the sub-Saharan Africa do not trust even the opposition. And I think this also coincides. There was a study that was done about 6 or 7 years ago that suggests that in developing countries, opposition parties, when they take over from an administration, perform worse, than the administration that they are replacing. So what you see there is that people of the sub-Saharan region don't necessarily like military coups, just as my brother mentioned earlier on. But because of the difficulty of, replacing bad governance through the ballot box, the only option they have, and in which they derive at least short-term satisfaction, is the military coup. And that tells me that if ECOWAS, if their purpose of wanting to intervene in Niger is to discourage military coup, I don't think that is going to be successful. Because the reason behind these military coups have something to do with security, humanitarian, and the administrative incapacity of most of these leaders. So I thought that I chip in that. Now, I think we've already, heard from, my colleague there as to why within the Sahel region, particularly the Francophone countries, why there are a series of coups ranging from Mali, Burkina Faso, and so forth and so on. I think all of them have something to do with France. And the way that France has governed that, those regions are so punitive, so unfair. And so although they have what one might term as a democracy, the reality is that it is not the kind of democracy that one would actually consider a full-fledged democracy.
And Africa today is victim of many external spoilers that work against its stability. I mean, what I don't really agree with is the approach that sometimes the West world had with these countries. For the idea I have is that we are always ready to give advices, but not so ready to give a hand. They don't trust us a lot. And I cannot say that they are completely wrong. That's why my opinion is that we have to change this approach.
I was listening to Her Excellency Erika Nakwa a couple of days ago, and she drew a line or a difference between the traditional military coups in the Sahel region, which were masterminded by the colonial masters with the intention of replacing leaders who were loyal, to their nation, with individuals, puppets who will promote their own agenda. And then she separates that. And then this current wave of military transition, I don't want to call it military coups, or revolution led by some of these young Africans in Burkina Faso, Niger, and others. She preferred to label them as an ideological realignment of their economic, political, and social values. And I can understand that. And I think I share that. I think we need to draw that distinction. I'm not like, the earlier introduction here made it plain. We are not supporting military coup. But when you consider the fact that the kind of democracy that France lives with the Francophone countries is very, very unusual. For example, before even the president of Mali, Burkina Faso, or any of those Francophone countries could take over power, even though the election has gone through the normal democratic electoral process, there are no-go areas laid out to that president by the French authority. Now, those no-go areas are areas in which the new president should not make decisions or interfere with if that president wishes to complete his or her term in office. Alive, of course.
Right.
Yes.
I would like you to take a pause and then, but great submission. And thank you so much for opening up the conversation in a very interesting way. One would wonder the reason why France has such a strong hold on independent countries on the continent of Africa long after they're gone. How is it that, because we all know how Francophone speaking countries still pay on an annual basis $500 billion to France. If any of these African countries, Francophone countries, like the Togos, the Benins, want to borrow money, they have to go through France, their own money. And so how is it that this is still possible and these countries are not able to break away from France and have control of their own economy and, of course, their resources? Fred, and I'll come to you, Dr. Issa.
Actually, you bring up a very good point. And to answer that question, again, I like history. We need to look at the historical perspective. If you recall, when the French colonies in Africa started gaining their independence, one of the first French colonies to ask for independence was Guinea. And it was done by President Sékou Touré. And if you recall, at the meeting that de Gaulle had with the leaders of the French colonies, encouraging them, if they wanted to seek independence, and that France was not going to challenge it, there was a caveat to it. And the colonies, being scared of their colonial masters, most of them were willing to toe the line, just happy to have independence, and not understanding that with independence should come all the things that go with being independent military, independent currency, independent, all that. France wasn't willing to give up all that. Sékou Touré, President Sékou Touré of Guinea, was the one African who stood up to France and challenged them and rejected all the things that they put in, all the clauses that they put in there that would have limited the independence of Guinea. And you see what happened to Sékou Touré. France made sure not only did he not succeed, but when they left Guinea, they destroyed everything that France brought to Guinea of any benefit, including pictures in the government house. When Sékou Touré won the election and moved into the government house, there was nothing there of any value. That's how vindictive France has been. We all know that the father of democracy in Africa was Nkrumah of Ghana. How many Africans today, including the ones who are 60 years old, realize that Nkrumah did not die a hero in Ghana? The heroism of Nkrumah started coming back as Africans started tracing their history back. Because remember that Nkrumah had to leave Ghana on exile because Britain did everything they could to discredit Nkrumah to the point where he was so unpopular in Ghana, the country he birthed,
yes,
that he was not even going to be able to win an election.
Yeah.
And in the process of fighting for survival, he became a dictator. He was painted a dictator, and he was kicked out of Ghana.
Right.
I'll conclude on this note. I don't want to monopolize it. What happened to this guy in Zimbabwe, Mugabe? Mugabe died a disgraced African. As far as Africans are concerned, including Africans my age and your age, who really don't study history, they see Mugabe as a disgrace. What happened to Mugabe in Zimbabwe is exactly what they did to Nkrumah in Ghana. My point is this: anytime you have an African leader that comes in with patriotism to fight for Africanness first, starting with building an African currency, building an African ability to go to the table and negotiate in the best interest of Africa. If you're Nkrumah and Mugabe and they cannot reach you through your own people to kill you, they minimize you to the point where even your own people who you fought for start being ashamed of being associated with you. And the only way African leaders have been leaders of respect, quote unquote, to the West is when they find puppets. And as you can see, Dr. Davidson will agree with me. And Senna, you are very worldly and very knowledgeable about Africa. All of a sudden, Bola Tinubu, who planned a civilian coup, is becoming a hero to Britain and America and France, because they have a guy who has so much dirt in him that if they recognize him and make him something to negotiate with, all of a sudden he could sell Nigeria to them. Watch out, Nigeria will be the next that gets sold to America if Africans, not Nigerians, if Africans across the continent don't use this opportunity of what happened in those 5 African countries in West Africa with those coups and stand up and rebel. And I don't mean rebel to kick them out, but rebel to say enough is enough. We want our continent back and we want to negotiate on equal grounds.
Wow. How do you do that from that brilliant point you just made, Fred? Thank you so much. How do Africans literally get to a point where they can say, we want our nations back, considering or understanding now more so that Africans have leaders that are not necessarily working in the best interest of Africans? And you gave a great example of Tinubu, President Tinubu, who is of course now the president. You said he commits similar coups, or he committed something. He said civilian coup, and we're not privy to that. We don't know what that is. Dr. Israel, would you want to throw a little bit of light on that? But of course, also respond to the question earlier: how do Africans come together to literally regain their autonomy of their own democracy and their resources?
Okay, I think Fred, touched on very important part of African history there. Now, how is Africa going to do this? I believe that one of the ways by which the African governments and people will be able to wrestle back control of their own destiny is through mindset reprogramming. And I think a number of us who have been producing very short videos,
yes,
distributing them across Africa, I think the dividend is beginning to pay because the younger generation, like you and others, are beginning to key in to the fact that it is time to effect change in Africa.
Mm.
And when I listened to Captain Ibrahim Traore, the current head of state of Burkina Faso, when I listened to Julius Malema of South Africa, when I listened to President Ruto of Kenya, and when I hear from Professor Lumumba of Kenya, who has done some brilliant work trying to reprogram the mindset of our leaders, when I look at the work of and achievements of Paul Kagame in Rwanda that demonstrates that Africa, we can do it, and it is possible, and a number of others, it gives me joy and belief, coupled with the contributions of Africans in diaspora. I think what we need here now is to continue to push, is to continue to share information, and most importantly, I think this coup, the coup in Niger, the coup in Burkina Faso, has for the first time widened the understanding as to why these countries are engaged in military coup. In fact, the support that they have, or the kind of information that gone around the world within the past couple of weeks, in fact, the world has not been able to share that for over 3, 4, 5, 6 years. So as events continue to take place, I'm not supporting military coup, but some of these military transitions, which I know there are some of them, more of them are likely to occur, as the history of those coups are told, as programs like yours, which Fred and we are discussing right now, as people get more information and begin to understand that there is nothing actually wrong with Africa, but rather the leadership. I think gradually, like what is going on in Nigeria at the moment, I think this continent is going to continue to produce a new generation of well-informed voters. And from there, I believe, not quite long, we're going to get the right kind of leaders that we can rely on to continue to do the right thing for us.
Thank you so much for sharing. So basically, you were saying that most Africans on the continent are not privy to the reasons, the real reasons for their plight, their poverty, and so they blindly support certain leaders, or push certain leaders, or perhaps are not involved actively enough in the democratic process to make sure that we are putting in the right leaders into office to lead Africa, rather following lines of following tribal lines. Basically, is what, and then of course, allowing some politicians to influence them with money, because I'm from Ghana and I understand how politicians influence elections and all of that. You also mentioned something about President Tinubu committing civilian coup. Once you said it, somebody will be like, what is that? Can you please touch on that for a second? What do you mean by civilian coup, and how did this happen? If you may, Fred.
Well, Africans in general saw a phenomenon in Nigeria over the last, between July 2022 and March 2023, when the final gubernatorial elections happened. And what happened in Nigeria is something even Nigerians in Nigeria couldn't believe could happen, where a relatively young candidate, not young like you, Senna, but relatively young compared to what we have in Africa, a 61-year-old dynamic candidate who, yes, no question about it, was part of the corrupt past, not personally corrupt, but part of the corrupt political parties, decided to leave the major opposition party and join an inconsequential party called Labour Party, where people laughed at him, including me in my YouTube show soon after he left the opposition party, said to my audience that that was political suicide, that he should have stayed in the opposition party and tried to change it from within. But in my next show, I came back and said what he did was genius, because what he just did was going to change the political landscape of Nigeria, and it did. In many shows until the election, I continued to say that what he would do in that election would be like what Ronald Reagan did to Jimmy Carter in 1980 in America. Because on election night, we were looking at the screen and everything was red except one state was blue. Reagan won in a landslide. Senna, in that Nigerian election in February, even though the records don't show it, this young 61-year-old candidate destroyed the two major political parties across the country. In a country where you said he's an Igbo man, in a country where you said Fulanis and Hausas would never support an Igbo candidate because of Biafra and because of IPOB. This young man got his share of 25% required in a majority of the states, including the northern Fulani and Hausa states, and then destroyed the field in the south, including in western Nigeria, where Bola Tinubu was from. If they had released the real results in the west, you would have found out that he got over 40% in some and his fair share of 25%. Senna, in Lagos State, where Tinubu is from, he beat Tinubu, depending on which results you're looking at, by anything from 300,000 votes to 900,000. In their rigging of the election, they declared him winner in Lagos by 10,000 votes.
I think that is the first time that has ever happened in a long time. Is that correct? Because even I'm not too knowledgeable about Nigerian politics, but it was all over social media. Is that correct?
That in is so.
In terms of an outsider winning Lagos State
by that margin. But okay, I'm glad you brought that up, because the beauty of what Peter Obi did in Nigeria was the effect I saw of what was going on in Nigeria, the effect I saw of it in Ghana, in Cameroon, in Gabon, in Kenya, across Africa, young people celebrating what Peter Obi was doing in Nigeria and praying for their own election to come so they could duplicate the same thing. The point I'm trying to make is, I'm an Igbo person. I grew up in Lagos. And I always tell people, I'm as Yoruba as you can find a non-Yoruba person. And what has hurt Nigeria and the African continent is tribalism.
There you go.
And what I found with the candidacy of Peter Obi is that Africans can actually live as fellow countrymen and women, because this new generation of youth In my show, I refer to it, I say, this is not your grandpa's generation of youth. This is a new generation of youth. The new generation of youth across Africa is going to revolutionize what's been going on in Africa. And this new generation of youth, if they can just take one more bold step, and I hate to say it because I live in America, and when I say it, it's easy to say, oh, you are in America, you want us to die. But I'm saying that if it takes dying, it's time for a revolution across Africa. It's time for the youth across Africa to say, enough is enough. And Africans respect elders too much. It's time for our youth to stop disrespecting elders that don't deserve respect.
Okay.
Because the reason you have all this corruption is because the youth are scared to tell their dad and their mom and their uncles that you are thieves. Look them in the face and call them thieves.
Okay. So one way these attributes, these values that Africans have, which is honor, respect for our elderly, has always been cherished by us and has been admired by some from the West, but it also is our problem, especially in this dispensation. And so that boldness, and of course, we can take a cue from the African-American struggle for their own civil rights movement. People went on the streets. They've been fighting since they got here, and they're still fighting. And as a matter of fact, for the brevity of African Americans and for the people who laid their lives, their leaders who laid their lives, is the reason why some of us can come to this country and freely have these type of platforms, speak on issues and whatnot. And so you're right. I believe that it's high time that the youth in Africa, or African youth, develop this attitude of saving the continent from some of these corrupt leaders. And I really thank you all so much for breaking it down. We are talking about the coup d'etats have been going on in Africa, especially West Africa. What does it mean? What will be the consequences if ECOWAS actually attacks Niger, which is the conversation now? So we want to swing into that, the meat of the consequences. First of all, let's look at the military force of Niger and these other African countries who have pledged to support Niger. Are they capable? Will they be capable? Now, does ECOWAS have the capacity, the military might, to even undertake that war if it happens and be successful? Who are behind this war? Are there economic reasons, after all, behind this war? So we will go back to our guest, Dr. Israel Davidson Nonyerim, all the way in the UK. We really want to appreciate him because it's about midnight, if not 1 a.m., and he's up for the good of Africa. He is up, and he has to be up. He has to be up early Wednesday morning to go to work, but he's staying up late to help the conversation. So we really appreciate him. And then we also have Fred Nwankwo, who is the chief publisher and founder of Ireland Magazine and Ireland TV.
I think the mistake from the word go was to threaten them that they will go to war instead of starting with negotiation and diplomacy. And by the time they wanted to do diplomacy and negotiation, those people refused. Now they have to go back to the table and go back to diplomacy. In the 19th century, the British set up the West African Frontier Force, recruiting Hausa people to attack Ijebu, attack Ibadan, attack other places. Today, Yoruba president wants to set up an army. I don't know whether he's going to use Hausa forces to go and kill Hausa in the Niger Republic, creating problems for us. I just think they're not going to go. It's a very flimsy excuse coming from a president who had 8 million votes out of a population of 200 million people. He doesn't have that kind of mandate.
Is ECOWAS going to attack Niger? Is that going to happen, Dr. Israel?
I think before I answer that, if you don't mind, there was a very important question, something you wanted Fred to clarify on, but I think the point he made about B2B, I think was worth it. But you wanted us to explain what we mean by civilian coup.
Yes, yes.
Now, what we mean by that, that referring to Tinubu himself, is that there are laws governing the conduct of election in Nigeria. There are laws governing, how candidates are screened and the necessary qualifications that candidates will have to satisfy before they are actually admitted to contest. Now, Tinubu was able to maneuver his way through a number of those checkpoints. Now, for example, forgery is a major crime in which any candidate that there is any element of forgery, either in birth certificate, in school certificate, in identity or name, should be disqualified. He was able to present what is presumed to be fake birth certificate, fake qualification, even his name, actually his actual name. There are some controversies there, and he was able to maneuver himself through all those legal hurdles and still emerge the presidential candidate defies all logic. Now, in a democratic election process, all right, individuals will have to market themselves. This guy, in his character, was able to pay people even to impersonate as bishops and pastors to endorse him. Now, the Nigerian population discovered that those things were actually lies, and yet nobody disqualified him. There was a drug case he was involved in the United States that resulted in cash forfeiture. Now, again, he was able to maneuver his way through that and still remain a candidate. He imposed Muslim ticket on the nation, though Nigeria is a secular state, yet nobody disqualified him. He refused to attend any presidential debates because actually he was certain that he was going to win, and yet nobody challenged him.
Dr. Israel, are there documents where people can reference some of these
yes,
things?
oh yes. I mean, it's in the, if you Google all this, you'll be able to get it. And also it is part of the evidence presented at the current ongoing tribunal, electoral tribunal. Finally,
before you continue, you said there are evidences of these allegations you're making, because we haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. But
you said there are.
Now, if anybody wants to reference it, and they go on Google, they can find it. Do you have sources that they can reach out to if people want to look at some of these things?
In fact, all they can do, if they like, they can key in Tinubu's, whatever coup or whatever we want to call it.
Tinubu's birth date, Tinubu's,
anything you put in the Tinubu's certificate, Tinubu's career, Tinubu's forgery, anything you put in there, you'll be able to see all this.
I'm sorry to interject, just 1 minute. For even more clarity, if you go to the state of Illinois, the Federal District Court of the state of Illinois, and put in Tinubu indictment of 1993. It's public record.
Okay. All right. Thanks for sharing that. Can we educate the audience, and for those who are watching later, if at all this war happens, would Niger be indeed supported by these two African countries, which is Guinea and Burkina Faso,
Burkina Faso, Mali.
And Mali. These three countries, of course, right? And would they be able to contain the might of ECOWAS? Does ECOWAS have the military power to even engage this war? And then we can look at the consequences if it happens. I'm sorry. I think that
can I take that?
Yes, please take it. Sorry about the break.
Okay, here's the fact. The largest country in that region is Nigeria. The Nigerian
in terms of population or land?
In terms of population, in terms of land, and in terms of resources. Okay. Military resources, quote unquote. Over the last 10 years, Nigeria has been fighting an unofficial war against Boko Haram, and they are losing that war.
Okay,
that's one aspect of your answer. The second aspect is that most of the generals in the Nigerian army are Fulanis and Hausas. The people in Niger are Fulanis and Hausas. I already told you they intermarry. And you have Fulanis who have wives in Nigeria and wives in Niger.
Yes.
So you're looking at a military force that's going into a war lukewarm. And they are going in there to be sabotaging the country that sent them to protect their cousins in Niger. That's one aspect. The other
that's one aspect. Okay.
The other aspect is that when you go into a war, you have to be backed by your people. 90% of West Africans, from Ghana to Sierra Leone to Ivory Coast to Nigeria, are against this war. How do you going to destroy your cousins at the calling of France and America and the European Union? Let's say you go in there and succeed and overthrow that government. It's only going to start an unrest across West Africa that you are not going to be able to contain.
Thank you for coming in, Fred. Dr. Israel, do you think that if this war breaks out, Niger, first of all, Niger, among all these countries we're talking about, Guinea, Ghana, Burkina Faso, Mali, and all these West African countries, Niger is closest to Nigeria.
Yes.
And from the submission that Fred just gave us, Nigeria would have to be at the forefront of this war. Now, it's going to be fought in the terrain of Niger. Do you think that as a country, as a country, Niger as a country, with the support of these other three nations, again, do you think the military might is there to contain ECOWAS?
Listen, judging by previous military interventions, whether it's in Liberia or other places, Nigeria provided the logistics, Nigeria provided more of the troops. So in other words, Africa relies heavily on Nigeria, to provide both the financial and military support for such operations. Now, currently, I'm not sure that Nigeria is in that capacity to be able to foot the cost of any military intervention. That is one point. Now, if you look at the economy of all the 14 states or so that make up ECOWAS, all of them are in trouble. Many of them have issues meeting their day-to-day and monthly financial obligations, even paying the armed forces. So it is going to be difficult for such a military operation to be executed successfully. So that's why I do not believe that there's going to be a military intervention. Now, however, because President Tinubu is so forceful about going into attack or whatever, restore democracy in that region. We can only guess that perhaps there is an assurance to him that the cause will be taken up by the advanced countries of Europe and America. Now, if that happens, then what you're going to see here is that Russia and a number of other interested parties are likely to come in. In other words, what you're looking is a scenario where the current Ukraine war is being replicated in West Africa.
Right.
And I'm not sure that West African leaders are going to be that stupid to import such calamity in the region. So to answer your question, if it is a matter of other African states, including Nigeria at this point in time, coming to make their way into Mali, it's going to be very, very difficult because, into Niger, because Niger has got that assurance from Mali and others. And these countries have already stored enough weapons because they have been fighting insurgency for such a long time. Secondly, Nigerian troops are already battling Boko Haram insurgency in our own country, and they are occupying so many places. There's about 32 states in the country. It is going to be very, very difficult for Nigeria to move or even find sufficient troops to be able to go into Niger. So, by intervention supported by the Western power in America, it is going to be very, very difficult for ECOWAS to undertake such a task.
Thank you again for a brilliant submission, gentlemen. It is 8 minutes past 7 p.m. Central. You're watching the Progressive Mind Show. My name is Sena, aka Alinko, and John Oben just joined us. It says, great to hear from you all. Great topic. And again, if you want to ring in, it's 815-277-5047. Dr. Nonem, is it more of economic reasons why this war is going to take place, or otherwise? Because I think they're making it look like, oh, the coups happening, ECOWAS needs to stop. I heard the president of Ghana the other day talking about how they need to intervene and stop these coups happening, because it's going to encourage others to go ahead and just overthrow democratic leaders. But there are also conversations and rumors that it is more than just military personnel wanting to overtake democratic elected, wanted to overtake or wanted to overthrow democratic elected leaders. Fred.
I think, yes, the ECOWAS, if I understood your question correctly, ECOWAS is threatening to intervene for economic reasons in the interest of the West, and for protecting and for protecting corruption among West African leaders in the interest of West Africa. None of them is going. I'm sorry. So this war is being pushed or is being encouraged by ECOWAS leaders, so that they can protect for the fear. They can protect themselves. Yeah.
Okay.
They can protect themselves from coups in their own countries.
Okay.
Because they too are very corrupt, and many of them came into power illegally.
Okay. Doctor, which goes to the point Dr. Israel shared earlier, that you mentioned something, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said something about the potential of this coup continuing in some African countries, and perhaps even in Nigeria. I don't know. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
You mean,
Doctor?
Yeah, Israel, to myself.
Yeah. Do you think you said something about how these coups has potential to trickle into other African countries? From the look of things, why did you say that? Why did you feel like there was a potential of this happening, in other countries?
Yes,
in other West African countries. Sorry.
Absolutely. Look, ECOWAS leaders. Now, listen, ECOWAS leaders, including the current president of Nigeria, are part of the corrupt cabals directly linked to the Western imperial powers to keep Africans poor. So vast majority of African political regimes are totally committed to the inequality of their own people, where a tiny layer of individuals are getting filthy rich, whilst the Western powers are siphoning the resources of our country.
Okay.
So they are more concerned about the domino effect of the coups in the Sahel region. That's the point that Fred is actually also making.
Right.
So they are concerned about being potentially overthrown in their own country, looking at the way that the military, the countries, the number of countries that have already been toppled militarily.
Right.
That's particularly. Now, the point I'm also making there now is that you can see that there are so many talk shows, a lot of publications and discussions on the current ongoing military coup in Niger. Niger. And what it has happened now is that as the discussion broadens almost across the whole world, both military officers, the junior and senior ones, who perhaps weren't fully aware of the role of France and the way that Africa generally is being cheated by these, hungry and very wicked, multinational companies and their parent countries, are gradually becoming aware of the reasons behind these coups. I think they're also beginning to get more information about their leaders. And as a result of that, there is the potential that younger military officers, who may not want to go actually to Niger to die in protection of the interest of the West, might begin to cook something and say, no, the time has come for Africa to be liberated. And there is a high chance, the potential of new coups taking place is there.
Now let's look at a few things that we wanted to touch on. ECOWAS is let me take this comment that just came through from John. He says ECOWAS is a group of friends trying to protect each other's interests. It is not different from the African Union. What needs to be addressed is constitutional coup. I think that he's a Cameroonian, and Cameroon is also a very potentially a country that has a high potential of a coup happening someday. They have a president who's been sitting there for about 30-40 years, and Cameroon have not realized their full potential. So who knows? We are not encouraging military coups, but African leaders need to understand that the right thing has to be done for its people. So again, we are saying that this potential war that ECOWAS is threatening against Niger is not necessarily France influencing them, but this is just ECOWAS, leaders of ECOWAS, some corrupt African leaders being fearful of their positions as leaders of military personnel overthrowing them. Is that what the case is? Because again, people are also saying, oh, this is not about ECOWAS at all. France has all this energy resources from France gets all its resources from Niger, and they're trying to protect it, and so they are pushing ECOWAS to go fight for them, France. Which really is the situation, or is it both, Fred?
It is both, and I already hinted at it previously. But
okay. So you talked about the fear. We've talked a lot about. I'm sorry to interrupt. We talked a lot about the fear of African president, which is why the ECOWAS wants to go in. Some African presidents, right? Let's talk about the France factor and its heavily reliance on resources from Niger. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, the France factor is a big part of it. There's no question about it. And nobody should be surprised about it, because if you look at the history of France and West Africa, everything they've done is in the interest of the economics of France. However, in this particular case, the West African ECOWAS forces planning to go into Niger can make excuses that is because France is appealing for it. But the reality is that if you look at the people who are the leaders of those countries that are planning a military intervention in France, you see that it doesn't matter if France advised them to or not. Remember, Senna, soon after at the ECOWAS meeting where Tinubu was appointed or elected the chairman of ECOWAS, remember that one of the most significant things he said at that meeting was that coups are no longer going to be tolerated in Africa. At that point, France didn't send him to that meeting in, I forgot where it was. Yeah. France didn't send him to that meeting. He went to that meeting because the quickest way to raise his profile in Nigeria, where he was in a tribunal where his presidency is being challenged, going to ECOWAS and knowing Tinubu, if you know him well, everything he has done in life is either by forging the papers or by bribing his way into it. If we find an investigative journalist to go into that meeting that elected him the chairman of ECOWAS, I guarantee you you're going to find that he bribed leaders of Africa to make him the chairman of ECOWAS to raise his profile and his credibility to be the president in a country where he has no business being president because he did not win the election. So their whole thing is coups are happening in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and all. Who can it be next? It could be Nigeria next. It could be Ivory Coast next. It could be Ghana next. And I'm a little more lenient to the Ghana president. I see him as a little removed from the Tinubu mold and the Ivory Coast president mold. But still, he's part of ECOWAS.
Yes.
They are watching their backs and they are wondering, when is it going to happen in my country? Tinubu appointed a chief of army staff that is from his tribe. And I laughed. The reason I laughed is that God knows that 3/4 of his tribe are not in support of how he became president. So it doesn't matter who you make chief of army staff. Nigerians, including Yoruba people of your tribe, are not happy with what's going on in Nigeria. And I don't care what they are doing today. I wouldn't be surprised if a coup happens in Nigeria. I'm not calling for a coup, but how much can people take? Whether it's in Nigeria or Ghana, or how much can people take? Before they say enough is enough.
It's enough. On that note, somebody's saying, remember the uranium in Niger in particular. France is basically a welfare state parasiting off of West Africa. This has always been a big conversation. I mean, everybody's saying, yes, France is behind this, France is behind this. Would people say that, listening to you, to great minds like yours, would you say that, well, you are, relinquishing or you are pushing more of the blame towards African leaders? There's some of these corrupt African leaders wanting to go to this war versus France being behind it, because a lot of people in the international community on the continent blame France for Africa's woes. A lot don't really want France doing what they're doing. So would you say that it's fair that people would take what you're saying, which is, this is ECOWAS wanting to do this all this while. This is ECOWAS presidents, some of ECOWAS presidents being scared of coups, than France really behind this. Should we place?
Just give me 30 seconds because I know the doctor needs to speak. No, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that you cannot separate the puppet from his master.
Okay.
These African heads of states are puppets. The only
you mean some of them?
Well, some of them. I definitely know the one in my country is seeking to be a puppet, because the only way he stays in power is to be protected by the military force of the United States or France or any of those people. So the puppets are willing to do whatever it takes to perpetuate the corruption of France in Africa, leashing on French African countries for the last 60 years. But no, the onus is on France. Okay. France is the main culprit, but they found convenience in the puppets that are in power in Africa. That's what I'm trying to say.
All right. Thank you. Dr. Israel, please.
No, look, Fred is correct. It's both. But I think we've handled, the aspect of to do with the ECOWAS leaders.
Yes.
But also France. Now, listen, the war itself, ECOWAS cannot finance it. And so this is where France comes in, and United States. Let me tell you the reason. Niger is the only country in West Africa that opens its land and airspace freely for America or any interested power to come and display their military might. That is the reason why United States has got the largest air base for drones in that country. Now, so for United States that is seeking to control the world, they need regional alliance, and Niger provides that. With the level of investment that both United States and France have committed in that region, they cannot allow, a military coup that would deprive them the opportunity to continue to enjoy what they are doing in that place. The second reason here is that Niger plays an important role in France's supply of uranium. Now, it may interest you to note that US itself relies on uranium to power its electricity. Currently, they source about 14% of their uranium from Russia. Now, with the problem now emerging between NATO and Russia, NATO, of course, United States is part of it. They're trying to find an alternative source, which, of course, Niger provides that. So when you put all this together, plus all the taxes that France, what they call the, I've forgotten what they call that tax. There's a particular tax, that, either colonial tax or whatever, which they earn from these Francophone countries. You realize that France is going to lose. Now, let me tell you, before the former president of France, Chirac, died, he made a very powerful statement. He said that France would reduce to a third world country without the Francophone African countries. He made it very good. Yes. So it shows you how important, the Francophone countries are. Now, France has already lost Mali and a number of other countries through military coups, and have moved their some of their troops to Niger. So Niger is almost the last bus stop for them. And there's no way that they will want to intervene themselves. And so what they've done here is to talk to people like Tinubu, who is looking for legitimacy. I remember that he was in France. There was a picture of him embracing Emmanuel Macron, almost like boy and girl friends. And when you look at that picture, you realize that that was the beginning of preparing Tinubu for this very particular time. So it was after that visit on his return that he made that pronouncement that he was going to stand against military coups in West Africa. So France is behind this to a considerable extent.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing. 7:36 p.m. Central. You're watching the Progressive Mind Show. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter right now. You can also watch this program right after the show on this same channels. We are also available. The audio version is available on Spotify. On your drive home, drive to work, you can just go to Spotify, type The Progressive Mind Show, and listen to the show. Listen to our previous episodes on there. We are going to wrap it up in a little bit, and we have learned a lot from this conversation. Think that this is super important. So if you just joined us or if you're watching, share the feed. Okay, like it, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, and share it so that we can participate in this process of transforming the mindsets of Africa, the youth of Africa. Because when we get it, then we can build the Africa that we want. Because it's obvious that some of these leaders that we call and we call presidents are definitely not working for us. And so the onus is on us, the youth. The little you can do to add to this struggle is perhaps sharing the feed so somebody can also be informed, especially us Africans. Europeans will not save Africa. America is not going to do it. Having said that, does Africa need allies? Do we need, or as a continent, or let's focus on West Africa? Is it significant for us to have international allies? Because in all of this, not Germany, what's his name? Russia is taking advantage of the situation. Russia has canceled debts, about 20 billion of its African debts. Russia is promising military support to all African countries or some African countries who would like to defend their sovereignty against attacks from other nations. Is Russia taking undue advantage of this? Is it necessary that African nations have ties with countries like Russia and even China, military-wise? And is that in the long term, how does it look, Fred?
I think Russia is taking advantage, but do we expect anything less than that? Should be the question.
Right.
Africa needs allies. Africa needs military allies from the countries that have built up very major military industrial complexes.
Okay.
However, in getting those allies, Africa needs alliances with all the 50-something countries in Africa, more importantly than they need these alliances with the West. Why do I say that? When we can build a strong African alliance where we trust each other and we are not backstabbing each other, then it doesn't matter what kind of alliances we build with the West, because at that point, we'll be going into the negotiating to build those alliances on an equal footing with them, where they cannot turn around. If we're asking what we demand that they don't want to give, they cannot turn around and go to Ghana and have Ghana sabotage Nigeria, or go to Nigeria and have Nigeria sabotage Ghana, and all across Africa. So the biggest alliances we need, which is where I'm counting on our youth, because our youth are less removed from the biases that the brainwash of our forefathers. I'm counting on the youth to build alliances across Africa. We don't have to have the United States of Africa, but we need to have the United Alliance of Africa, where we may have independent countries, but we know we are working for the benefit of each other, because the only way we can succeed in that area is to work together. Just one last point, talking about military. America has this strong military base in Niger. How far is Niger from northern Nigeria? Where is Boko Haram based in Nigeria? If America has the interest of Nigeria with the bases they have in West Africa, how long will it take America with their drones and all that stuff to wipe out Boko Haram in Nigeria? I leave that as a food for thought, to tell Africans that neither American or France or European Union or even Russia, that is looking good today in what they are doing, none of them have our interest. The only interest they have is their interest. Because if they had our interest with the proximity of Niger to northern Nigeria, Nigeria shouldn't have problems with Boko Haram.
Great point. Really, really appreciate that. I don't know if Dr. Israel wants to add your voice to that, But I would like us to look at the consequences. Please feel free to touch on what Fred just said, Dr. Israel. But I want to pose this question straight to you, Dr. Israel. What would be the consequences if there's now? First of all, there was a news in the I saw something on social media that the pipeline, that petroleum pipeline or the natural gas pipeline that runs through Niger all the way through Algeria, that's supposed to be feeding France, has been blown by allegedly, Nigerian soldiers, whatever. Is that something you guys have you seen that news? Is there any legitimacy to it?
I haven't seen that.
Okay.
I'm not aware of it.
Okay, great. But there is a pipeline that exists.
Yes.
That takes gas from Niger through these countries, through Algeria, and it goes to France.
The story that no one's talking about is the massive natural gas pipeline that is nearly set to go online. Now, it starts in Nigeria and it flows up through Niger on its way into Europe. Chevron and the United States have already invested $13 billion into this. And after the Nord Stream pipeline destruction, Chevron stepped up production to get this pipeline up and running. And now the people of Niger are saying, wait a second, why are we going to allow a pipeline to flow right through our own country into Europe? You are doing nothing for us, and yet you continue to steal from us. So sorry, no more pipeline. This is why Europe is terrified this morning. And it was always going to be a very cold and dreary winter because of the natural gas destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. This winter could be even worse now if this pipeline is not allowed to go into action in Africa. Niger is saying, sorry, you're not going to use our country to transport your natural gas into Europe. Get out of here. Europe is facing catastrophe.
Right.
It hasn't yet been commissioned. I mean, I think, remember, that's a very interesting point you just raised there. That pipeline was conceived probably around 1970s. And then eventually, during Obasanjo's time in 2006, there was a feasibility study done on that pipeline. And the deal was done. But that project came to an abrupt end because Europe and America would not back it up. Because at that time, they were getting cheap oil from energy from Russia. So as long as it wasn't in their major interest, they frustrated it. Now that they ran into difficulty with Russia, suddenly they remembered that in 2006, there was that project. So they contacted Nigeria and Morocco and other people, and they began to reconstruct this very particular pipeline from Warri in Nigeria to somewhere Morocco or whatever it is, up into Europe. And this is one of the reasons why Niger is strategically important. And also one of the reasons why America is also building, built this drone facility in Niger, because the pipeline passes through Niger. And so any military coup, like you're saying, it is possible they've blown it up, who knows? Now, any military coup has the potential to halt this particular project. And believe you me, if they do, Europe will freeze. And this, of course, because Russia is no longer supplying as much as they did, as a way of also punishing them. So that is a very important project for them there. Now, there was a point that Fred also made, which very, very important one. If the drone base the Americans have constructed is to protect the interest of Africa, they would have helped in curtailing the activities of Boko Haram. And they haven't done so. The reason then is that the drone base is there to protect all those areas where they benefit from Africa. It isn't there for us. As to the consequences of military intervention, like we said earlier on, I do not think there is the likelihood that there be one. But in the event that it happens, what you find here is that the ongoing regional war against terrorism will suffer from the diversion of military resources. So terrorist groups could then take advantage of the situation. You will see increased infiltration by terrorists across the border into Nigeria. Nigeria has such a porous border between Niger and Nigeria itself. There is equally the danger of prolonged intervention almost the Libya-style consequences. You see, it is easy to start a war. It's normally very difficult to be able to stop it. And the longer it takes place, the more chaotic you're going to find that very bit, that region, plunged into major disaster. There will also be mass influx of refugees into countries bordering Niger, coupled with the fact that, if indeed France is found to have participated in one way or the other in financing ECOWAS, what you're going to see there is that Russia and Wagner Group are also going to come into it. So in other words, you are looking at the almost continuation of the war ongoing in the Eastern Europe at the moment on the doorstep of Africa. I don't think something that we should pray for.
Wow, thank you so much. It's 7:45. We wanted to 7:47 Central. We wanted to end the program around 7:45. We have been discussing consequences of ECOWAS attacking Niger, or ECOWAS going to war with Niger in this wake of coup d'etats and coup d'etats versus democracy in West Africa. Very, very interesting times indeed for us as Africans. And who is to make the change? If not for us, who is going to change the narrative for Africans? Because definitely not this current crop of presidents. There are some good ones, like the Kenyan, the Rwandan, that are doing well for their countries, the Uganda, Tanzanian presidents. A few are doing their best, but I think it looks like majority of African presidents, especially sub-Saharan African presidents, there's a history there. We've had issues, or we've had a long history of corruption, and president after presidents not necessarily working for the people, but for themselves more so. And so we need to engage as young Africans. The most important conversation as young Africans and professionals is to make sure that we are educating the less privileged, those who are not privy to the information that they need to make decisions, especially when they go to the ballot boxes, to not elect or select presidents and leaders who they have any type of tribal connections or whatever reasons that may precede the national interest. That we are Africans are well informed, so we are elected, consistently elected. We may not get it right, but if we keep rotating leaders based on merit, we'll finally get it, because that's all we need. Good leaders, and Africans on the continent of Africa will do well for itself and the entire humanity. Like you all said, if that pipeline is blown, nobody wants to see Europe freeze. Nobody wants to see Europe go through excessive energy crisis, because we also have Africans who live in Europe. And so if Africa do well, we all do well. The rest of the world, everybody does well. And so let's pray and keep working for the economic independence and growth of Africa. Gentlemen, I was going to say ladies and gentlemen because I'm used to having mixed guests. But gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you. I'd like to give you all the closing remarks to wrap this conversation for us. Again, consequences. We mentioned some of the consequences, but please feel free to mention some consequences that we haven't talked about during this conversation in your closing remarks. And I'd like to begin with Fred.
So these borders were not made for us. If we are going to become manufacturing giants, we need to do away with these borders. We need to see the African market as one. We need to be able to develop giants like Airbus, that makes components in the United Kingdom, that makes components in France and in other parts of Europe, but has become a global conglomerate. They didn't come together because they loved each other. We all know how they hate each other, but they've come together to survive. Africa must come together for us to survive and indeed prosper. These borders that you create silos for yourselves amongst, you must always remember, are not your creation. These were creations of people outside of this continent who made these borders not to develop you, but to extract from you. Now that you want to develop yourself, we must start looking at these borders and we must start removing the barriers.
Well, first of all, Senna, thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. All I want to say is that I'm appealing to the youth of Africa. We have a strong opportunity today by coincidence of what's gone on in Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, Niger, and Sudan lately. We have a strong opportunity to open the eyes of our youth. Whatever discussion we're having here is not about us. I'm 65 years old. I'm closer to 6 feet under than I am to 6 feet above. Every fight I'm doing is for the benefit of the youth and our children that are unborn. And today is an opportunity for our youth to start to see themselves as Africans, regardless of the boundaries that separate us. And if our youth can come together as Africans, it's a matter of 5 to 10 years before we can be at the same table with anybody and any power out there and negotiate things that will make a better Africa for them tomorrow than the one we have bequeathed them up till today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fred. Dr. Israel.
Right. Now, there was a question you raised earlier on about alliance. Now, we have a choice between Russia, China, and Europe and America. But what you find here, although all of them have their own national interests, I think it is more beneficial for us to look up to the Russians and probably the Chinese themselves as well, because these these regions, these powers, based on the kind of interaction we've had with them over time, they are more upcoming in terms of negotiating without conditions. And also you realize that Russia is prepared to to invest, is prepared to divulge technological secrets, whereas Europe, America are making theirs conditional. Particularly in recent times, I have just learned that one of those instruments they use to curtail the progress in Africa, which is IMF and World Bank, they are now making homosexuality a condition for securing loans. So they are prepared to export habits, culture, and value system that adds no value to us. Whereas China, Russia, they're prepared to do proper business and deals. My view here is that our leaders should be highly selective. Consider what Europe has to offer as opposed to what Russia as well as China are prepared to do for us. Now, that is the way I believe that in addition to what the advice Fred has given to the youth, to galvanize, to work hard, be more patriotic, and I believe it won't take long. Africa will get where we expect it to be. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure having you. I'm looking forward to having this set again. Really been inspired, motivated. Thank you all for sharing. Dr. Israel, I know you have a YouTube channel. You have great pieces of informative narrative about Africa. Please, how can people get access to it?
All they need to do is to Google my name, Israel Nonyerem Davidson, and you should get them. That is what that site is called. It's just by my.
Awesome. You're welcome. And Fred, how can people get in touch with your magazine, TV show, YouTube channel?
For the magazine, it's AllenMagazine.com. For the YouTube, it's African Viewpoints Unleashed on YouTube. African Viewpoints Unleashed.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, once again.
As far as I'm concerned, Since we met you people 500 years ago, look at us. We've given everything. You are still taking. It's true. I mean, where will the whole Western world be without Africa? Our cocoa, our timber, our gold, our diamonds, our platinum, our whatever. Everything you are is us. I am not saying it, it's a fact. And in return for all of this, what have we got? Nothing. Anti-personnel indoctrination against ourselves. If you go and cook your horrible diseases like AIDS, you say it is us. You brought us tuberculosis. We didn't have this big cough until white people came here. In exchange for Africa giving Europe 500 solid years of our people, I mean not Europe, the Western world, of our human beings to work your canes, to dig your gold, to take in gold itself, diamond, I mean, you know, fish, peanuts, palm oil, everything. In exchange for that, we have got nothing. Nothing. And you know it. Nothing. And you look upon, you know, white folks look upon us like monkeys. It is true. It's in your literature. Some of your best thinkers have said this about us. Have you heard of all these Germans? Have you heard? Okay. Yes. They said, Lord Burton, yes. People like that, they said, we don't even have the brain of animals. That's what we've got from you people.
But don't you think that this is over now?
Over where? Is it over? Who said that AIDS came from the green monkey? Is it over? Is it over?
Well, if this is your impression, do you think that you can ever forgive us?
It's not a question of forgiveness. I have nothing against you. My point is that you did and you are doing for your survival what is necessary. We can't blame you for that. The fact that we didn't do enough for our own survival and we are still not doing enough for our survival, that is not your problem.